Welcome back to another OMLab tutorial. Today we're going to be taking a look at a little something I like to call a MIDI gating effect. Not mitigating, but MIDI plus gating plus effect. So kind of happened into this. It's kind of a cross between a few different techniques that I've used in the past, and it's sort of like rolling your own MIDI effects setup. As well as creating a live gating tool. It's perfect for live performances, which is why I refer to it as a live gating tool. Um, so let's just jump right into this. It's going to take just a moment to explain. None of it is complicated. All of it can be duplicated within just a couple minutes, really. And once you run through the setup yourself, just a small handful of times, you'll have it. It really doesn't have a steep learning curve at all. And here's all you need to make this happen. Audio. You need an audio track of some kind. It can be something that you put together with a software instrument, as long as you either route it through a bus or something, or bounce it to audio first. So you are dealing with true audio, because this does involve a sidechain, and we do need an audio track for a sidechain trigger. So you need a piece of audio that you want to use. In this example, we're going to show you both a beat and just some basic vocals. You can do this with any kind of sound, but these two are vastly different from one another, and we figured we'd give you a small spectrum of examples here. And then the only other thing you really need is a synth that has the ability to accept a sidechain trigger from an audio source, and that will also allow you to route an external instrument in, okay, or external audio in rather than instrument, sorry, and that has a gate option, something other than just the typical ADSR maneuver. Okay, so the way that this works is, and you can see that we already have audio 1 routed in here. We can go ahead and set that to none so you can see all of the steps from scratch. This right now is just a basic sawtooth wave. You can see that it's set up here on the wave oscillator, which is up here. And we've set our sub oscillator to the external audio source option. Okay, so when we play a note up here, all we're getting is this top oscillator action. By default, many patches made in the ES1 are actually running both a sub and a main wave oscillator. But for this, we're just going to use the sub, okay, because this is where the external audio option is, and that's all we need. We don't need any form of synth in this to make it work. So the next thing you want to do is make sure that your cutoff is up, for instance, just so you can actually hear the audio come through. And then you just need to set a sidechain trigger source. The other thing you want to make sure is that you don't really have a bunch of things happening here that you don't want. You know, if you don't want a bunch of weird modulation happening or a lot of distortion or anything, just kind of make sure that your other parameters are in line with what you want. If you have the option to initiate or an init patch, load it. It's probably the easiest way to get this done. And again, you don't have to use the ES1. This is Logic Pro. This is a stock synth that comes with Logic Pro. You can use any synth that has these same features. And it's a pretty lightweight synth, so this is a good tool to use. So the idea here is we are going to route, and let's start with maybe this beat here. We'll just solo this, and you can hear what this beat sounds like on its own. Okay, so it's just a little electro ditty. It's a stock audio file from the Logic Pro stock library, so anyone can play along with that one that has Logic. Again, you use any beat. And then the other one we've pulled out is just a simple background vocal, and it sounds like this. Okay, we've just set up this loop range here, so it's going to cycle back to the beginning when it gets to this point. And that is actually the one hitch to the giddy up here. Okay, we need to be running audio in our DAW to make this work because, and you'll see why right now. We'll start with this beat. Right now we can hear it. Play it. And that is because it's set to stereo out, so it's being routed to the normal output. But let's go ahead and set this to no output. Okay, so now this is soloed, and we're going to play it back. Can't hear anything, right? All right, so we will unsolo this, and we'll go ahead and we'll mute Carla here, and then we'll come up here to our synth. We need to have the synth track activated because we're going to use a MIDI controller to do this. Now, we need to set up our sidechain. Our sidechain trigger is going to be our electro beat, okay? And it's going to be set to gate here. Okay, now I've already set up just a little bit of sample MIDI. You can see the pattern right down here. It's nothing fancy, but it's just to kind of give you the idea of this is what a noise gate would do for you if you were to sidechain in this rhythmic pattern here. So let's go ahead and play that. Okay, so it's kind of like a cool broken beat kind of thing. And that could be useful for stuff. It really can. But it's a bit static, and that's not what we want. What we really want is to get closer to true MIDI effects. Now, if you're unfamiliar with MIDI effects, they're a little bit different than audio effects, okay? In that you're going to be using audio as a source, and you're going to be using a MIDI controller to manipulate the effects in real time that are affecting that audio like an instrument. So you're going to play the effects like an instrument, sort of. Okay, so it's very interesting. And what we're building here is not truly MIDI effects by any means. It really isn't. But it's a very cool combination of a MIDI effects like tool combined with your typical, noise gate setup. And it's really cool for live performances, like I said before. So let's go ahead and we will move this MIDI out of there, okay, because we're just going to be looping this. So if we hit play, we're not going to hear anything here, okay, and that's fine. We'll just leave this running for right now. And we're actually going to learn, just one more parameter here, maybe. We'll do this knob here. And that way we'll have control over our cutoff with our MIDI controller. I also, right before we started this, I loaded a few effects over here, and we'll get to that in just a second. I also mapped a parameter on one of these effects to this same MIDI controller, so you can get a better idea of just how flexible this technique is. Again, especially for live performances. So let's just go ahead and play a normal note, and you'll hear the entire thing just come through. Okay, now the very first thing that you'll notice about the benefit of doing this is that there are so many things already mapped and set up for you when you run through a synth like this. Like, for instance, velocity control. It's impeccable. So you barely touch a key and you barely get audio through, but you cram that key, okay, and impact. So you can get some cool effects going with using a couple different keys on your keyboard or a couple pads on your machine or whatever you happen to be using, your favorite MIDI controller. Remember that this is simply a gate setup. So as you move up and down the keys or pads on your controller, it's not affecting pitch or playback speed or anything like that. These are simply triggers to open a gate, and that's it. And that gate is going to remain open as long as that key or pad is held, and that's it. That's how simple this is. So here's just one key being used. Okay, nothing to write home about. Now, how about if I use low velocity with my left hand and high velocity with my right hand on two different keys? Let's see what it sounds like. Okay, so-so, but you could definitely hear a difference. But there are other things that we can do to this. Okay, we have mapped a a knob on our controller to the cutoff, and by default, as you can see just with the basic programming here of this synth, the velocity wheel, or the modulation wheel on my controller, is actually set up to an LFO effect. So if we turn that up as we're playing this, okay, you can hear that. Okay, and this resonance is kind of beefing that up just a little bit. We can also add just a touch of distortion in here. Okay, so you're starting to see a little bit more of the potential. Now, what if we were to turn on some effects? Let's see what happens here. Okay, a big reverb maybe. It does seem to be a bit much, really, honestly. Let's go ahead and turn that off. Okay, turn down that feedback on the delay. So what we've got set up here is a tape delay. We'll turn that off. This this ring shifter here, it's causing a lot of the mayhem that you're hearing, but it's a cool thing, right? Okay, so you're getting the idea, I'm sure. We're just going to go ahead and move on to our second example here, and we'll show you a few more bells and whistles. Let's see, we'll unmute Carla. We're going to change our sidechain to Carla in our synth. We're going to move down here, and we're changing the output of Carla from stereo out to no output. Okay, so we don't hear her when we play back. Correct. Okay, we're going to go ahead and switch back to the track that our synth is on again, so our controller is actually controlling this synth. And when we hit play and we start triggering, okay, so we have effects in place. Let's go ahead and turn on that reverb again. Okay, we've got a little bit of feedback happening in the delay there. Let's play with that cutoff a little bit. And I'll do something a little maybe just a touch rhythmic on my controller here, and we'll modulate our cutoff. All right, so what if we wanted to play with a little bit of delay here? Pretty cool, huh? So you can actually accomplish quite a bit with this little technique. Now, yeah, you could just use a pre-form, MIDI pattern like we set aside here earlier. And if we add this back, we can now free up our hands to manipulate a few parameters. And this is where you can start getting into some really cool effects here. Now remember, this is a MIDI triggered sound, so you can alter the pattern that's playing in your piano roll there. What if we crush it? All right, so, and this is still just your vocals, but I'm sure you can kind of get an idea of what kind of potential we're talking about here as far as, using this instead of a typical gating type of thing. Most of it is being controlled through the MIDI controller. It's an absolute genius way to throw your listeners for an unexpected loop. And it's fun, obviously. It's a great way to find some new creative directions. So it's not just a live tool. You can use it in the studio. If you're running short on inspiration, or you've got some writer's block or something, stick a random sound into a synth like this and start tweaking things and play around with it. It's amazing what you start to unlock when you start playing with things that are not necessarily rhythmic in nature, or not dominantly rhythmic. and you start shuffling the way that they're being delivered rhythmically, and it can really open up your eyes and ears to some new possibilities. So it's a neat tool, and it only takes I don't know, I would guess about a minute or so of your time to actually set up the synth and the audio tracks. Selecting your effects and stuff. Now that can take some time, and that should be a pretty open and free experimental process for you. Keep in mind that many DAWs support MIDI effects these days. You can also load a MIDI effects on here. So you really can take this in the direction of a true MIDI effects tool if you're using a DAW that supports it. And again, most modern DAWs do these days. And there are also third-party plugins that you can use for that type of thing as well. So that's it. That's how you set up a MIDI gating effect. And it's probably not a real thing anywhere else, but it is here in OhmLab land, and you guys just learned it. So we hope you enjoyed it. Hope it does something fun and funky for your next project. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you again soon. Cheers.